At about 1 o'clock this morning, you might have seen The She Creature, the latest weekly dose of low-budget 50s kitsch in BBC Two's Mystery Train slot. All the little gems in this series were made by American International Pictures, one of the most successful independents in Hollywood history. Founded in the mid-50s by Samuel Z. Arkoff and his late partner Jim Nicholson, AIP swiftly became famous for extravaganzas like The Incredible Two-Headed Transplant, Attack of the Giant Leeches, and the near-documentary Mars Needs Women. But in retrospect, Arkoff and AIP were responsible for a great deal more than treasurable kitsch classics. They anticipated many of today's most lucrative movie trends, and more importantly, gave now famous directors their first break, as long as the budgets were minuscule and the titles sensational. So get ready for thrills, chills, and a cast of at least 3 as we meet the last of the great movie moguls.
Okay, let's go. We had a different way of operating than anybody else in Hollywood. We started with the title. Jim Nicholson's the greatest title man I've ever met. He would come in the morning with a title like I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and I would just be struck with amazement because that was $1 million title on a $100,000 picture. Now we would go out and we'd take a number of titles. We had somebody who would go to the high schools, somebody who would go to the colleges, and somebody who would go or talk to important people in advertising who's we trusted. When we were satisfied that the title was good and the artwork was good and that there was a market for the picture, then we would have the script written. And then when the script was written, we would hire the director and so on and make the picture. People thought we were being odd, but in reality, they were being back-assward. Because if you look at any American or British manufacturing operation, they go out and test a product before they make it in any great bulk. They want to know there's a market. It's only been in the picture business that people make pictures that haven't the ghost of a chance.
I think AIP had a lot to do with developing that whole notion of high concept, where the whole idea of a film could be expressed through the title or through the ad.
What happens to our world if massive, monstrous man-beasts like this invade us?
If you look at the, say, the top 10 grossing films of all time, most of them now are like glorified Arkoff and Corman exploitation films. I mean, if you look at all the space pictures, the Star Wars pictures, even E.T., Little Monster picture, and Jaws. Jaws is the ultimate AIP film that was just done on a great budget with terrifically talented people.
Deep into caverns whose very air is putrefied by the stench of death, they search ceaselessly for a missing man, or possibly a giant spider no one really believes exists.
There's something wonderful about the sleaziness and the low budget, the low rent nature of it, because that's when you really do stuff. That's when you learn a lot.
Well, it's been said by others that necessity is the mother of invention. We started out to make inexpensive pictures because that's all we could possibly afford. And what happened was that we made these pictures for anywhere from $29,000 to $100,000. And of course, the fact was we only had enough money for whatever the days were. We did some pictures as low as 5 days. We did some pictures as low as 1 week. We had 6-day weeks in those days, and most of the pictures took about 2 weeks.
Those were B films. Those were kind of monster pictures and comic book type films. And what the films that are made today are like AIP movies with just enormous overblown budgets, you know. They're making movies the AIP made for, you know, $750,000. They're making for $50 million or $100 million.
You'll feel the heart-stopping strength of the most fearful monster ever known.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first.
It conquered the world.
The whole idea of coming in and making these cheap pictures at this time, when in fact everyone thought that you would have to make, you know, Cinerama, CinemaScope, full-color films to compete with television at that time, the idea was crazy.
Are you really ready to stop loving me?
I'll need you even when no emotion exists.
For a few dollars, you can hire a woman who'll fit all your fetishes. She'll match your requirements perfectly. Then if you ever get tired of her, you can always run down to the employment agency for another.
Roger was ideal because he was the tightest individual I've ever known. The biggest problem with a producer and director, and Roger was both in those early days, is bringing a picture in on budget. In that respect, Roger was even more economical than we were. It's almost as though Roger had, to put it in one way, economical genes. It used to be when he would go out, for example, shoot a picture, we would get the rushes back in a day or two, and we would look at them, and almost invariably I would call Roger and say, for God's sakes, Roger, extras are cheap, put extras in the background.
I would prefer to use the word efficient rather than cheap. I knew that I had a small amount of money, yet I wanted to make the best possible film, and that meant to work as efficiently as I could, to plan very carefully in pre-production, and to watch how I spent the money during production in order to get the biggest and best picture possible under budgets as low as $30,000 and $40,000 and $50,000 occasionally.
I made it possible for you to come here. I made you welcome to this earth. You made it the charnel house.
Sam was like a guy that owned a little store, and there was nothing expensive in that store. And so everybody came in and bought. The store didn't make as much money as a big department store, but there were the kind of things that people could buy who were going to buy, you know, go into a little dime store.
What Sam did, I think, is he discovered the American teenager of the 50s and discovered this as the new audience that he could hit. So, in fact, Sam really tapped into a gold mine.
Taking hold of the teenage crowd, coloring their practical jokes with hysterical humor that'll make you fall flat on your face.
Well, I saw an angle that was different. I recognized one factor. The majority of people who went to the movies were now young people. I saw an opportunity that nobody else seemed to have seen. Well, that may be, frankly, a little braggadocio. But that was that the people who were going to the movies were young people. Movies had not been made for young people before. Oh, sure, people say family pictures. What do they mean by family pictures? Walt Disney. That's really for the little kids.
Hey, you know what we need here, huh? We need some broads.
The very things that teenagers were preoccupied about, which was sex, romance, how to get dates, all of those things that young people were really thinking about, we started to make in this era. When the middle-aged and older people cut their movies down to an absolute minimum while they were staying at home, we started to make pictures for teenagers, by teenagers, about teenagers, and starring teenagers.
No adults. That was the big secret for all those AIP films. All the other kind of films, dating back to the Andy Hardy films, always had kids and then the parents too in the films. AIP said, the hell with the parents. I mean, we're not going to show them. The teenagers don't want to see that. I Was a Teenage Werewolf was probably the most vivid display of, say, teenage angst and separateness. I mean, teenager as outsider that you could possibly come up with. It's just an incredibly vivid, memorable way of conveying how painful and difficult it can be to be a teenager and how apart you can feel from society.
Roger had a title that he liked and a basic idea, Prehistoric World. We liked the idea, we didn't like the title. We wanted to get the teenage audience. Roger was slow in understanding the whole concept under which we did business. We said, look, Roger, we need to get the word teenage in.
Are all the men gathered? All the fools.
Roger, of course, consented to the new title, reluctantly, and he's groused about it a few times.
I never made a picture called Teenage Caveman. I made a picture called Prehistoric World, and it was conceived under the title Prehistoric World. I shot it that way, and at the last minute, because AIP had had a success with a picture called I Was a Teenage Werewolf, they changed the title to Teenage Caveman. It opened in Los Angeles, and I remember this, I still remember the opening line of the review. It said, despite its 10-cent title, Teenage Caveman is a surprisingly good picture. I took the review to Jim and Sam, and I said, fellas, you're killing the picture with this title. So indeed, they did change the title back to Prehistoric World.
I don't know who gave him that impression. I'm sure that he has seen all the advertising material. I'm sure he's seen all of the other material. And it may be that in his declining years now, that he has apprehensions and conceptions that he'd never had before. However, he's a terrific guy. We have a terrific relationship.
AIP they were the young hotshots in town, and they could just make films almost without anyone noticing. And I think for a long time, for a little while, the major companies didn't really notice, but when they started seeing the money that those films were making, almost every studio started trying to compete with AIP and make teenage films.
We began to realize about 1958 that we had to make a change because there was too many pictures of the same kind competing in the same market. I think we changed course at American International Pictures a dozen times. If you didn't change course, you died. And we decided to put the money into making Edgar Allan Poe's for several reasons. First of all, we had the benefit of a great name, Edgar Allan Poe. Didn't cost us a thing. Okay. Secondly, we signed up Vincent Price to head up the Poe Pictures, and he had been a successful star in several horror pictures. And it was very important to us because otherwise, as I say, you have to keep changing or you die.
The Poe films were a departure. We had 3 weeks in which to shoot, a long shooting schedule, and we were working in color, and we had a little bit more money. And they were kind of a breakthrough. As a matter of fact, they were a breakthrough for AIP and for me.
Yes. And even so, I could hear you coming. Every footstep, every rustle of your clothes. I could hear your horse approaching. I can hear the scratch of rat claws within the stone wall. Mr. Winthrop.
They really made their reputation with those pictures. A lot of people give the other pictures more credit, you know, the Little Shop of Horrors and those things. But I think it was the Edgar Allan Poe pictures that gave them their kudos, their first real lift into the big time.
The Poe pictures were really straightforward horror pictures with a certain amount of humor in them. We used to, you know, have a horror shock, and then we would follow it with something that was humorous, and then another horror shock. They were carefully tailored in that particular respect, and they hit the market. And quite honestly, something not always said about previous American International pictures, they were good. We went into the beach movies for the same reason we went into making the Edgar Allan Poes. We were upgrading our pictures, so instead of doing pictures like Hot Rod Girl and Drag Strip Girl, we decided to do youth at the beach. Basically, other than that, it's more or less the same sort of thing. But we had the beach, which was a wonderful background. And of course, we had Frankie Avalon, who would periodically say, surf's up, and they would all run toward the beach.
Those surf movies had a real charm, and there was always a motorcycle gang that came in led by Eric Von Zipper, you know, and the surfers would all go running around, and Frankie and Annette, and it was great stuff. Looking back on it now, it looks a lot better than it did then.
AIP was responsible for giving starts to a lot of tremendously talented people, and a lot of these people came in through Roger Corman. But be that as it may, they did produce Marty Scorsese's second film, Boxcar Bertha. They gave Woody Allen his first chance to direct a film, even though it was this redubbing of a bad Japanese film, What's Up, Tiger Lily.
Francis Coppola, who worked for us as an assistant director, and we finally gave him his chance to direct his first picture, which was Dementia 13.
The very first paying job that I ever got in the movies was at AIP. Willard Hike and I were hired as Larry Gordon's assistant, and Larry Gordon was head of the story department. And I think he just wanted a couple of whipping boys or something, and he wanted some smart college kids, you know.
And Milius did a lot of things, including, as a matter of fact, because he was very good as a writer, he would reform scripts or do some changes in scripts, and ultimately, as a matter of fact, did one script which was made into a picture.
Nobody gave me a chance then to, you know, direct a movie because I was crazy. And Sam gave me a chance.
But whenever I see money, I smile that way. You got a nice smile too, miss. I'd like to withdraw my entire account.
Your entire account?
Yes, ma'am, the whole thing.
And your name?
John Dillinger.
All right, everybody, hold it right where you are. This is a robbery.
That was the biggest budget that Sam had ever signed off at the time, and he almost had a heart attack when he signed the budget. Larry Gordon made him sign the budget, and I think he sort of gagged and just fell forward on his desk afterwards, you know. But I mean, he really did not like, he didn't like paying for it, you know. He liked it all in retrospect.
You're being robbed by the John Dillinger gang. That's the best there is. These few dollars you lose here today, they're going to buy you stories to tell your children, your great-grandchildren. This could be one of the big moments in your life. Don't make it your last.
It's really unfortunate that there isn't a place like AIP today, because we had freedom, and we made the things we wanted to make. And, you know, that was just wonderful. I mean, it was the best filmmaking experience I ever had.
I mean, he's a unique character. There are very few characters left in Hollywood. It used to be filled with people like Sam, but they're very few and far between.
He's been something of a mentor to me. We've worked together well for a number of years, and we're still good friends. I think Sam has been a great positive influence on American filmmaking.
I really don't think I'm that important, but it is gratifying to have accomplished something. Well, let's put it this way. As the Museum of Modern Art said when somebody asked them why they gave us the first retrospective in 1979, they said if Andy Warhol can be remembered for a Campbell Soup ad, then Arkoff and Nicholson can certainly be remembered for what they've done. And frankly, I think that we're better than a Campbell Soup ad. He only did a Campbell Soup ad. We've done more than 500.
I was once in the soup with Sam Arkoff. In the early 70s, AIP decided they wanted a Python-esque approach to their next Vincent Price vehicle. They couldn't afford a Python, so they hired me. This was not a marriage made in heaven. One of the producers' notes, before they sacked me, was, page 14, I question the scarlet fingernails, Vincent's character being what it is. I still don't understand that note. That's all for this week. Later tonight, you can see two AIP classics, John Milius's Dillinger and Roger Corman's Fall of the House of Usher. And next week on Moving Pictures, the Thomas dynasty from the first Carry-On to the Last Emperor. Steven Soderbergh fast-forwards from Sex, Lies, and Videotape to his new film, Kafka. Plus, Terry Gilliam relishing the Gilliam-esque delicatessen. Good night.